What's up, YouTube? Today we're going to ask ourselves, is consoles really better than PC gaming? Well, that just depends on the user. But I will say there's a lot of misconceptions about PCs and the true difference between console gaming and PC gaming. So I do want to take time to explain those differences. I want to start by giving consoles their props. Considering how well console gaming has handled the latest games, I must admit, at the start of this generation, the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series was very underwhelming for me. But seeing how these consoles have aged, I have to give consoles credit. They do have plenty of power when you consider the new AAA games running pretty rough on the PC platform. And I'm an owner of a RTX 4090, and I can say I struggle with many of the latest games. So the fact that consoles are able to grab these new games and squeeze 60 FPS out of them, this is nothing short of amazing to me. And let's not forget the PlayStation runs a handful of games at 120 Hz or high FPS mode. I really do see the comparison between the PC because the console has never reached 120 Hz before. But how powerful is a next-gen console really, when there's still some games stuck at 30 FPS? This includes Dragon Dogma 2, Gotham Knights, The Casting of Frank Stone, The Quarry, plus Until Dawn. But to be honest, that list isn't even long, so I'm even more impressed. Plus, we have to consider that the previous games that was stuck at 30 FPS did receive a patch that unlocked higher FPS and allowed the game to run at 60. In fact, they're doing it so fast while I was preparing this video, I just found out Dragon Dogma is running at 60 FPS. So we're already down one on the list. And this is an extremely small list in the first place. So this proves that the PlayStation 5 and Xbox got some serious power. So let's shift our focus more to the PC. For this video, I won't just compare consoles with a $3,000 rig. I also want to compare it with a $400 to $500 rig. A rig that is said to be a lot weaker than the next gen console. If you want the specs and parts of these computers, please scroll down to the description of this video. So let's compare hardware between my $500 PC with the PS5 and Xbox Series X. Let's start with the CPU, of course. The PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X have a very similar processor. Both have an 8 Zen 2-core processor, or basically an 8-core and 16 threads processor. The Xbox has a faster clock speed running at 3.8, and the PlayStation 5 runs at 3.5. So I believe it's safe to say the Xbox has a much more powerful CPU on paper. Now when we compare the consoles to my $500 PC, this processor is only an i3. We can see that the number of cores and threads are cut in half, with the base clock being even lower than the Xbox, but the boost being 4.3 GHz, which is basically the speed in most games. Now I'm pretty sure you don't see anybody with an i3 on YouTube, but don't underestimate the new i3 processors, because on paper you would think that the PC processor is a lot slower than the two console processors because it has 4 cores and 8 threads, which is half the number of cores on the consoles. But I'm pretty sure you recognize the boost clock speed is a bit faster. This is a Ryzen 5 3600 versus an i3 10th Gen. This i3 10th Gen is the processor that's in my computer that I use. This Ryzen 5 3600 is the processor that you should get when you're trying to build a budget computer instead of the one that I have. I basically use this i3 because I like the computers around my house to have similar CPU generations in case I have to troubleshoot. Plus this i3 in particular has always helped me build some very cheap rigs. But anyway, let's look at the Ryzen 5 3600. It has 6 cores and 12 threads. We know this processor to be faster than the processor in the Xbox Series X by a pretty good margin. And the reason I'm bringing this up, if you look at this PC benchmark website, you will see even though that the Ryzen 3600 is faster than the i3 10th Gen, you can see that the i3 also has a good amount of power, and this i3 does a great job keeping up with the Ryzen 5 3600 on benchmarks throughout YouTube. I personally believe that the i3 has better performing cores than both consoles and also might have better performing cores than the Ryzen 5 3600. But I have to say that the single core speed on the Ryzen 5 processor is faster. Also, the Ryzen 5 3600 has additional 2 cores and 4 threads. So all around, the Ryzen 5 3600 is just better than the i3, but the i3 isn't too far behind, at least most of the time. So overall, I would say the next gen console CPUs definitely wins against the i3 that's in the PC. But when you look at real life results, even this processor holds up to the next gen consoles. But on paper, this should not even be possible. Now let's focus on the GPU. The PlayStation GPU has 10.3 teraflops and 36 compute units, while the Xbox GPU has 12 teraflops and 52 compute units. The PlayStation has a faster clock speed, but a lot less compute units. When we look at the $500 PC, then we can see that the GPU is doing a lot better in the comparisons to the consoles over the CPU. The GPU inside the PC is a 5700 XT, which is on par with the RTX 3060. Well, somewhat, considering that an RTX 3060 is a lot faster than a 5700 XT in newer games. This 5700 XT has 9.7 teraflops and 40 compute units, which is more than a PlayStation, but less than the Xbox. The PlayStation has more clock speed, but the 5700 XT has a higher boost speed than the Xbox, but still lower than the PlayStation. The 5700 XT does not support ray tracing, so on paper the 5700 XT, if you minus the ray tracing, looks to be in the ballpark with the consoles. I would love to tell you guys which GPU is actually faster, but it's not that simple. At the end of the day, it comes down to benchmarks, so I will come back to this topic when I'm done with the entire list. So let's move on to memory. Both consoles have 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 memory. Meanwhile, the PC has 16 gigabytes of DDR4 memory and 8 gigabytes of GDDR6 memory. But this 16 gigabytes of DDR4 is not where this PC has to stop. This PC can hold up to 128 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM. This is where consoles and PCs go into two different lanes. And this is just another reason I personally believe you can't compare consoles to PCs directly. The 16 gigabytes of GDDR6, in my opinion, give consoles the advantage with graphics. But in a sense, a console doesn't use DDR4 or DDR5. So these consoles will fall behind when it comes to the CPU having to push for those higher FPS in games. The CPU on consoles just don't have the access to raw power like a PC. So I believe a PC has the advantage when it comes down to FPS, because as far as gaming and computing goes, it's not just graphics that need power. So now let's take a look at the bandwidth. You can see that the PC and PlayStation have about the same amount of bandwidth, but the Xbox has something weird going on. The Xbox has 10 gigabytes of their 16 running at a higher speed and 6 gigabytes running at a lower speed. I never thought nothing of it, but I have heard that the Black Myth Wukong did not make it to the Xbox platform in time for release because of this weird bandwidth. So maybe this is why PlayStation keeps outperforming the Xbox. Let's skip over the optical drive because most PCs don't use them even though we have the option to. Let's look at the internal storage and the expandable storage. We can see that the Xbox has more storage than the PlayStation, but the PlayStation has a cheaper expandable storage than the Xbox. When we look at the PC, you can see I have two hard drives. One 256 gigabyte NVMe I use for Windows 11, and 1 terabyte SSD I use for gaming. As far as expandable storage, this is where the PC is much better. This PC can hold 6 SATA hard drives, so it's much cheaper and much more potential space. Now let's compare these consoles versus my high-end gaming computer. My CPU on my high-end PC is not up to date. Unlike consoles, new PC parts come out every year. The processor I use is a processor that came out back in 2020, right before the consoles was released. Newer i9 processors are a lot faster than the one that I use, but I do have a RTX 4090 GPU, which is the most powerful GPU as of today. And it does bottleneck my processor, which I don't have much of a problem with personally. This CPU is an i9 10th gen. It has 10 cores and 20 threads with the same amount of base clock as my i3. But the boost on this gaming i9 is 5.3 gigahertz, which is a lot faster than the consoles. The GPU on the PC has 82.5 teraflops. This is an NVIDIA GPU, so there isn't any compute units, but there is tensor cores and ray tracing cores. The GPU doesn't stop there. It has a lot of clock speed as well, more than both consoles as you can see. When looking at the RAM, the PC has 64 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM and 24 gigabytes of GDDR6X RAM. And if you look at the bandwidth, this PC bandwidth doubles the consoles as well. As far as internal storage, this computer has 2 NVMe slots and 7 SATA ports. So in total, this PC can hold 9 hard drives. As you can see, I already have 5 hard drives, taking up a total of 4.5 terabytes. Overall, this PC has a lot more power than the next gen console, but I'm not showing you this PC because it's comparable. I just wanted to show you how a high-end gaming PC looks beside a console and how much more power does a console really need to start to stack up against PC high-end hardware. Now let's go back to my $500 PC because this is really the focus of my video. Now remember, I said to determine if this PC has more power than the consoles, it's going to come down to benchmarks, because regardless of the specs, the results within gaming is what we really have to go with. So let's go back to the CPU. Remember, I said the CPU inside these consoles are better. But if you also remember, I explained that a PC have DDR4 and DDR5 RAM. So I have noticed even with the i3, I am able to pull more FPS than consoles in several games. If not more FPS, I am usually able to match similar FPS on consoles. So on paper, the consoles win. But in benchmarks across older and newer games, I believe the i3 win. And this is weird. This should not be possible if you only look at the specs. Now let's talk about the GPU. The 5700 XT inside the PC does a good job on paper, matching the PlayStation 5, so I would say on paper, it's actually comparable to the PlayStation 5 GPU besides the ray tracing. But the Xbox Series X wins on paper, but this proves my point. The PlayStation 5 actually produces better results in many games, so specs don't matter at the end of the day, the results do. And I can tell you the GPU in this PC has given me better results in both next-gen consoles. If you take older games, this 5700 XT actually wins. When you consider a PC can play these old games at native 4K or very high FPS, no remaster needed, which is not the case for consoles. Now I do admit that the 5700 XT does struggle with newer games, more so like Alan Wake, but the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X use dynamic resolution and upscaling to deal with these same games. And while the PlayStation 5 performance mode on exclusive games does look good, I don't know if you can say third-party games look as good. And I know that newer games have given PC GPUs a tough time, but I also notice if you do what consoles do, then you tend to outperform a console. So this means just use FSR or DLSS, because with my 5700 XT, I am able to reach close to 100 FPS, and a console does not do the same with the same amount of games. Also, I've noticed for years that a console 4K never really looks as good as a PC 4K. Ultimately, a PC at higher resolutions cuts a lot less corners, giving a sharper image, and I usually find more detail in the background of a PC frame. So what I'm basically saying, for the last couple years, people have paid more attention to specs than real life benchmarks. And when YouTubers do compare consoles to PCs, they tend to run a PC at native resolution, giving a console an advantage. And this is my experience that I wish to share with you, so stay tuned as I document my experience. So my message is, don't overspend for nostalgia. If you want to spend money on power, look at PC. There's really no excuse to spend more on less. And as far as consoles being better than PC, a console can never be better, so stay away from some of these overpriced consoles and save you some money. This is AGPC. Thank you for making it this far in the video. I really do appreciate it. Like, comment, subscribe.